Next up is a panel made up of the people at Firewood, a leading marketing agency that are leading the way for diversity, equity, and inclusion. John will be moderating the panel with Kamron, Lanya, and Sam, and together they'll present a plan for you to implement a human-centered approach at your company. I'm excited to hear what these incredible people have to say, so without further ado, please help me welcome them to the stage.
Freedom!
So fresh, so new.
Freedom!
It's all for you.
All for you. Freedom!
Keep your ear to the ground.
Talking about
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this panel discussion on how to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion into your company's DNA. I'm Dr. John Shafran, an inclusion and diversity consultant at Forshay. Forshay helps organizations operate more successfully and equitably, from finding and developing talent, creating objective systems and processes, to fostering inclusive cultures where everyone is equally respected, valued, and feels a sense of belonging. We've all been through so much since the beginning of 2020. The global pandemic, nationwide protests after George Floyd was killed, a stressful election, the storming of the US Capitol, and more. We all gained new responsibilities and additional worries. And throughout it all, people lost their jobs, their usual ways of life, and their loved ones. We're also currently in the midst of a very long and overdue national dialogue about systemic racial and economic bias and inequalities. This conversation has become even more urgent as the pandemic continues to highlight disparities among communities. We know that COVID-19 related unemployment and mortality rates are significantly higher for BIPOC Americans, the LGBTQI+ community, and people with disabilities. Additionally, the increasing racism and acts of violence towards Asian Americans has really only amplified our need to act. In our current context of ongoing crises, it's time to abandon the stance that work is compartmentalized from the rest of our lives and our commitments to social justice. Employers have an essential role to play in stamping out these systemic structural inequalities, a responsibility both to their employees and an opportunity to change industries for the better in the long run by fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion within themselves in a more strategic and holistic way. So in this discussion, we're going to reveal strategies for building DE&I into your own organization's DNA by talking with a few folks from a company currently taking the journey themselves, Firewood, a global marketing company that is part of the S4 Capital family of companies. Let me briefly introduce you to today's panelists. We're joined today by Lanya Zambrano, co-founder and president of Firewood, Kamron Hack, senior director of global DE&I and culture at S4 Capital, and Sam Haskin, SVP, group account director, and leader of the inclusive marketing practice within the company. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about how you began working with us at Forshay in 2019. In the last 6 months, we've seen this huge uptick in our industry in the number of organizations reaching out now to do the kind of work that we've been partnering on these last few years. So I was wondering if you could actually share what motivated you to reach out to support this commitment within your company.
Yeah. Hi, John. Great to see you. I think
Likewise.
It's been a while, and I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's an important one. And let me just start by saying that our company was built on 4 core values: humility, authenticity, inclusivity, and social responsibility. And it's these values we live by. They're also the values that we use to make decisions, whether it's hiring, whether it's deciding which clients to work with. And it's also, these values also drive growth for our company, possibly counterintuitive, but it's true. And the other thing is, part of our value system is listening to our people. And we do that through surveys. Like every great marketer, it's important that we listen to our people and we gain insights, and we keep ourselves accountable and we live up to what we stand for. And that's always been embedded in our business. And in 2019, we were growing very, very rapidly. And it was about August 2019, we had just completed an internal inclusivity survey that Kamron had sent out. And it was really focused on those values, because as you get bigger, are you really walking the walk, right? And one of the outcomes we had was to create an internal DE&I working group, task force, if you'd like. And the whole focus and goal of that was to get together and have honest conversations around what was happening in the organization. Were we representing everybody's voice? Were people able to get involved where they needed to? And really, it was a connection point. That said, we felt like we needed an external perspective, and that's when you joined the conversation. I think it was around December of 2019. And we brought you in to really kind of assess from a third party. And it was the best decision we made.
We found it's really important to identify those collective blind spots and start to think about this work first by collecting data to get a clear understanding of where your strengths are and your areas of growth are. And you folks rightly saw that there were some places where you could have improved. And a lot of times organizations begin with this work with a set of assumptions about how equitable or inclusive they are without having the data to confirm or disconfirm those assumptions. So it's always great to have an outside perspective just to take a look and collect some data from the outside. I also wanted to maybe chat a little bit about, I had opened up this panel just now reflecting on a number of collective shared tragedies that have further laid bare our systemic inequalities. And thinking back specifically to the killing of George Floyd, what happened for you all in that moment, and how did that translate into direct action at your organization?
Yeah, I'll start that one.
Thanks, Kamron.
Great to see you all. Thank you, John, for being here with us. Yeah, for me, it was really personal. I had a very visceral response to seeing someone who looked like they could be part of my family, many people looking like they could be part of my family being killed for no reason at all. But this feeling wasn't new for me. We all know that these events have been happening here in the States since the 1600s. My paternal grandparents moved the family from Memphis, Tennessee to Compton, California as a direct response to the murder of Emmett Till. So these stories are woven into the fabric of the Black American experience, but this time felt really different for me. And I think it's probably because of how public this murder was, and how the rest of the world was seeing the exact same video. My colleagues were seeing this exact same video. So I couldn't compartmentalize like I was used to doing. Working at a company where authenticity is a very lived value, I felt not only compelled, but really safe in sharing how I felt at work. And so because of that sense of safety, I don't think it was possible for me to mentally separate my work and personal life in this moment. So I ended up writing a long email to my boss, who's the head of HR, about how I thought we should say something to our employees. And then I shared those thoughts with our founders. And thankfully, they were already on the same page, which was very comforting and not at all surprising, because that's just who they are. So we talked it through. We worked together on a message to our employees to address the issue and to offer support specifically to our Black employees. And Lanya, I'd love to, if you'd like to share what was going on for you and Juan at that moment.
Yeah, and I think you said it. After I saw the video, my first reaction was this very visceral response, and it was this really public execution of someone. And I was sick. I was sick to my stomach. I was sad. I was disgusted. It was a gut punch. It was a gut punch to me. I know that if I felt that way, our teams felt it. And it was incumbent upon us, upon the leaders of the company, to address what happened, right? Martin Luther King said, "In silence, there's complicity." And as you said, we've always been very transparent around what's going on and communicating how we feel to our people. And when you sent that email that weekend, I believe it was a Friday, we talked on Saturday, we talked on Sunday, but it was to make sure that we're aligning around our values and to be very clear about our point of view. I think, like any communication, transparency is important, but you got to pick a lane. You have to pick a lane, and you have to be very clear. And our lane was, it's not okay. We condemn acts of racism and marginalization. And that was very, very important in that email. The other part in that email that was incredibly important was our show of support, right? Focus on our people and acknowledge our Black Firewoodians. They are more tired, angry, confused, and they felt different than the rest of us. And it was important that all of us, we were getting support. There were things like emails, and this was the beginning. So I want to say that there's something about what started, which was a short-term focus on action and longer-term action that preceded that. And we did TED Talks, our book club, immediately started reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, and we had a scenic club where we looked at various TED Talks. We provided a LinkedIn learning path around how to be an ally. And then there were other things externally that we felt were important to show our support. And that included supporting organizations. So part of our value is supporting those underrepresented communities. And in this instance, we supported the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the United Negro College Fund. It was very important to show that level of support. We also, we published our actual numbers through the Commit to Change. The key thing in all of this was show up, be transparent, start to take action. You can't do everything, but small steps. That was really the key here.
Thank you for sharing that, folks. I'd love to also hear about, maybe later in this conversation, about how you approach providing that support for your Black employees, but also not putting the onus on them to solve challenges that are not of their own doing or that had any control over, but really thinking about how do we do this as an organization and involve our BIPOC employees as well. So maybe we can get into that in a little bit. Of course, work to create a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable organizations. That has been going on for long before last year. I'm wondering if you folks could talk a little bit more about how these events over the last year altered how companies are approaching this work going forward.
I can take this one. I think before 2020, DE&I was almost treated like a luxury or like extra credit. Urgency behind it wasn't as consistent. I think it really took the events of last summer, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Elijah McClain, all happening in such a short period of time. People really couldn't look away. And I think because of that, there was this acknowledgement that, it's been part of the cultural conversation since even before Rodney King, but there's just been this like passive disapproval, and the passivity has really kind of led to this boiling point where we really need to make up for lost time. And it's a pretty quick conclusion to draw that a lot of this stems from inequity, and a lot of inequity is about economic inequity and inequity and opportunities. And so the first place you look for that is within companies. And so both companies are hearing it from employees and from consumers, a very, very loud voice. They had to kind of become a part of it. They had to participate in a lot of the onus of this kind of went to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think before George Floyd's very public murder and then the subsequent expansion of the Black Lives Matter movement that started in 2013 after Trayvon Martin's killer was acquitted, the pace of this work was a lot slower. And like Sam was saying, probably not quite as high on the priority list. And in addition to those voices you mentioned, Sam, of employees and consumers, I think I would add that the activists in our communities have also played a significant role in bringing additional awareness and adding some pressure to companies to look within and to assess the ways in which they might be contributing to the problems of inequity and exclusion. I'd like to believe that this awakening is leading companies to more fully understand the necessity and the benefit of having a more comprehensive DE&I strategy, one that gets integrated into every part of the business, from recruiting and onboarding, performance management, training, client acquisition and retention, and vendor selection, anything, all of those things. And I think it's becoming more and more clear that these efforts can't solely live within the confines of human resources.
Yeah, there's definitely this perception that we need to act and act now, and where do we start? And what we've found in our work, we spend a lot of time fielding requests for things like unconscious bias and allyship training, but those requests to kind of provide that awareness and those skill sets, they aren't always tied to a larger set of DE&I goals that are anchored in your values. So where do you folks see DE&I needing to show up within a company? And more importantly, how do you approach DE&I holistically and for the long term in the larger S4 organization? And I think this question I would particularly like to hear from Lanya.
Yeah, and I think Kamron started to talk through that a little bit, the comprehensive part of DE&I. It must be the fabric. It has to be in every fabric of the organization. It's, it is a unique time in our history. I like to refer to what happened last year as wars on our health, on our society, on our social fabric, right? That social and racial injustice that we all experienced. And really, it's about helping our teams cope in this new normal, that uncertainty, which is, piling up from day to day, it's taxing all of us. And so, there are a lot of things that we started, and I talked about those earlier, assessing, the organization, trying to figure out how they're feeling, bringing together people, not making it all about HR, giving people safe places so that they can discuss issues. Safe places is a really, really important thing. But the biggest change for longer term was making sure the onus and commitment remained strong. This isn't a one and done thing. This is a long-term commitment. And so leaders have to show up, they have to focus, and they have to be clear that it's not a short term, it's a long-term outcome, and it's hard work. Accountability, I mean, we can say this until we're blue in the face, but accountability is really, really important. Publish numbers, make sure that changes are really happening, because if they aren't happening, your employees know that. Building programs that support underrepresented communities. We at Firewood started working with Hack the Hood on some internship programs. We started our S4 fellowship program focused on Black universities, and this is a 4-year program. We also started bringing in more training and development programs that we'll talk about a little bit more later. But the longer term is growth mindset, right? Let's make sure that we don't have to have all the answers, but we have to build on the things that we're doing, and we have to be accountable. And the end result is constant, not end result, but the other thing I would add is you have to have constant feedback, because some things may not work, and that's okay. You have to try new things, but continuing to be committed is important.
Thanks. Talking about having a growth mindset around this work is really important to bring up. And I thank you for bringing that up, Lanya. And having spaces for employees to surface what the challenges are for different populations is equally important as well. A lot of our clients and our potential clients talk about being wary of giving people a place to discuss challenges in the workplace, but that's what's going to inform your strategy in the long run. So, who do I need to serve better? Where are we falling down? What are our blind spots? So those places to discuss and to surface up challenges are really important to try to foster within any size of an organization. And you started hinting at this sort of more macro approach. How does this actually show up day to day at the company at Firewood and S4 Capital? What are some of the tactics that emerged out of our assessment that you've adopted? Telling us a little about how you started to build out a more integrated playbook.
Sure, yeah. We see this as a 3-pronged approach with recruiting, solidifying a culture of belonging for all people through training and opportunities for growth, and then examining what you make and how you make it, and looking very closely at areas where unconscious bias or leaning heavily on stereotyping and pigeonholing may have inadvertently become standard operating procedures. So with recruiting, it starts with learning how unconscious biases can seep into the recruitment process, and then preparing recruiters and hiring managers with tools to counteract these biases. It's about learning where to source a more diverse set of candidates. So we've started, training our recruiters and hiring managers to think differently and to look in different areas for their candidates. And then as you're adding new perspectives to your company, it's important that the culture supports that diversity and supports a sense of belonging. So we've started by building a baseline of understanding across the employee population through training on the fundamentals. And we decided to start with a mandatory online learning path that covers things like unconscious bias and gender dynamics and various forms of discrimination of protected classes, microaggressions, things like that. And then we've also recently started to supplement that self-directed learning with special programs that address equity, like the S4 Women Leadership Program, which is very new for us. We just launched it with the UC Berkeley Executive Education Program. And 50 of our senior women leaders across the globe are engaging in this 6-month learning journey to enhance their ability to lead globally and strategically and inclusively. And with this, we hope to bring more gender balance to the top levels of leadership. And we also supplement online learning with opportunities to get to know our people. We think that's really, really key. That's a part of building connection. Like on International Women's Day, we hosted a series of panels to learn about the experiences of some of our women in leadership. And we also, from time to time, like to bring in guest speakers to talk about various elements of diversity. John, you'll remember this one last year when Juneteenth was approaching, a holiday that was very new to a lot of our colleagues. we took the advantage of a learning opportunity by hosting a fireside chat with a professor of African American Studies that was moderated by our friends at Forche. And then recently, our London team hosted a DE&I week with experts who talked about everything from biases in advertising to inclusivity and recruitment. And with that, we think it's very important to stay connected to external efforts in the community. And Lanya's been talking about that a little bit. So we partner with organizations that are also committed to making space for underrepresented perspectives, like AdColor and One School and Tech Grounds. And then finally, another key part, actually, I don't know if this is finally, but I'll stop talking in a second.
There's never a finally. There's never a finally.
Yeah.
There's so much to do. Another key part of a culture of belonging is about building a sense of community within the company. And that's one of the many purposes of our ERGs. And building community can create a safe space for these difficult conversations that need to happen. Like last summer, when we further acknowledged this movement towards social justice at one of our all hands, one of our white employees wanted to explore ways for people to be better allies and to make change through anti-racist activism. So she got together, she rallied a bunch of co-workers, and together they created what is now our anti-racism working group. And so those are the ways that we can try to build this culture of belonging and ready our people with training and help them all grow.
I think it's actually great to the way you're approaching this, to thinking about this doesn't have to be entirely top down. A lot of the initiatives that you folks have created are employee led based on where people want to grow themselves and where they want to learn. And then I think the other side of this as well is that you have done all this great work to sort of build DE&I into all different parts of your organization. But there's also this other commitment that you've made, which I think Sam could talk a little bit about next, is that sort of external commitment to how you work with your clients and the products that you create.
Yeah, that was a big part of when we created that task force. One of the big points of interest for people within the company is to really take a look at what we're doing and how we're doing it, and see if it still holds up against our values and through this lens of inclusivity. And so we started with just looking at creative, like how are we representing people in the creative work that we do? And we put together some ways of kind of checking ourselves, auditing the work that we do, writing guidelines, kind of creating a baseline for cultural awareness within the creative team. But then we also pretty quickly realized that creative is just part of the environment. So creative gets its direction from briefs. Briefs come from insights. Insights come from data, and data comes from research. And every step along that way kind of assumes that the step before it had it all figured out and did everything perfectly. And what we're seeing is a lot of steps along the way are opportunities to insert unconscious bias or to just kind of round down or continue forward with habitual behavior. So we're in the process of pretty far down the process of breaking down all of those pieces and asking pretty prescient questions around how we're doing this. Like, so for research, we look at focus groups and how we're casting focus groups. Are we looking at demographics in light of how they're represented within our community? And if so, given the small sample size of focus groups, are we tokenizing certain individuals to represent entire communities, or how do we balance that out? And those are questions that we need to ask. And then within the environment itself, are we creating a space when we're conducting our focus groups where people feel like they can actually say what they're thinking, or are they steered by the sort of environment of the room or other people's opinions in the rooms and don't feel like they have that safe space? When we're doing quantitative research, are we looking at things like access to technology, let alone are we looking at things like accessibility? And that keeps going through everything that we're doing. We started looking at events, and within our events, are we creating spaces of belonging and places where everyone can feel like they have a part and they should be there? For virtual events, are we looking at things in terms of accessibility and in the content of events? Is it something that's going to be relevant to everybody? So every step within the agency, we're having to do this work where we're digging in. We're asking these hard questions, we're doing what we can to answer them, and then creating a process for internal training and just kind of publishing all of what we're finding as a result of this. And so luckily, our culture is such that people in the company are really excited to do this, and they're really invested in doing it. And everyone within each of our capabilities is raising their hand to participate in this process. So we're finding some really, really good information, and we're getting some really good content and training and learnings out of it.
It's a great point you make, saying that we can take I hear you also saying that some of the tools that you developed internally to see what our blind spots are, where we can improve, can easily be translated into the work you're doing externally as well. So it's kind of additive. And I think that part gets left out of this work, that it doesn't just have to be internal facing, and that it really should be built into the way we do business, essentially, like thinking about whose voices are missing, what insights are we missing, who's being excluded from the conversation, and how do we reach them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's part of a discussion. I mean, we can't be the only ones asking or answering these questions and treating it like it's some secret sauce and it only belongs to us. It actually kind of works against what we're trying to do here. So yeah, no, it's really important that we're able to kind of share and turn it into a larger conversation within the industry.
You folks have made a lot of progress, and in the future, you're going to be sharing a lot more of your learnings. So my understanding is, I'm also curious. I'd like to hear a little bit more. So even though you made a lot of progress, we all know that this work is very challenging. We're talking about changing behaviors collectively over time, changing entire cultures, shifting them, and that does take time to bear fruit. And Kamron, you mentioned giving people, set skill sets that they can execute on, and everyone starts kind of at a different place with this. So not everyone starts at the same place, and given that, there's a lot of misconceptions abound. So what are some other challenges companies should expect to encounter along the way if they're starting out on this journey of infusing DE&I into their organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in addition to those different levels of understanding of these issues, I would say that we should expect some resistance as well. I've been thinking about this a lot, just with lots of conversations I've been having as I'm getting to know our larger global organization. Some of these topics can be really emotionally and politically charged. And some people are really comfortable with the status quo and might not really understand the benefits of this work yet, to the extent that they're willing to engage. They haven't necessarily arrived at the place where they understand that change like this can ultimately have a positive impact on everybody. So it's on us to recognize this and to make sure that the messaging that we're putting out there is inclusive enough that we're reaching people of all levels of understanding. I think one of the real misconceptions out there is that creating space to include a more diverse set of perspectives means that you're taking something away from someone else. And that's just not true. On the contrary, including more perspectives will make us better, and it will make us more innovative and allow our company to grow and to thrive. And that ultimately will create more opportunity for everybody. And then you have the other side of the spectrum. And this is where you've got the people who just get it. And they've realized the collective error of our ways, and they want to change it all right now. They've found the issue. They're eager to rectify it immediately. And I do appreciate that energy. I really do. And I also will continue to beat this drum of the long journey. And these folks hear me talk about, the fact that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And I will continue to beat that drum because we do need to build the stamina for this measured approach so that the change can be impactful and long lasting. And that means we have to stay open to this ongoing cycle of listening, as Lanya said, with collecting feedback and continuing to learn and continuing to act in ways that make sense as we continue to grow.
I also think that messaging is really important too, of saying that this is not zero-sum work. This benefits everyone. We're talking about creating a more equitable workplace for everyone.
Yeah, and I would add this can go in the opposite direction. I think we're seeing this we're seeing this a lot now. This whole idea of these reactive commitments. A lot of these companies right now are committing a lot, but they're ringing empty to a lot of employees. There's a lot of statement fatigue. And what I mean is that a lot of companies are focused so much on what they want to put on social, but that isn't necessarily aligning with how they believe internally. And that's my biggest concern is, are companies being authentic? I mean, we had to look ourselves in the mirror in 2019 and ask ourselves, yeah, these are great, these are our values, but are we really being true to our values? And I think we're coming into this whole environment right now that it can go wrong. I'll give you a couple examples. After the death of George Floyd, an agency in Minneapolis did some really egregious things, and a number of employees walked out. They released deceptive data about their diversity numbers for their commit to change. They underreported directors and overreported managers to make leadership seem more diverse. Really not a smart thing. And recently we've seen companies, they're rushing to advertise their commitment, as I said, but it's in conflict with how they feel internally. There are a couple examples. Harvard Business Review wrote an article called "Woke Washing, Your Company Won't Cut It." And they talk about someone internally who's trying to get a promotion. She's done everything she needs to, but her VP has no time for her because she's busy focusing on getting the right message out externally about how they're doing everything right from a diversity perspective. Again, these things can go really, really in the wrong direction. So the moral of the story is be careful, be accountable, but people know when you're lying, especially your employees. They know when you're telling a different story.
I would also add absolutely that your new talent coming in looking to work with you, an organization, is going to be asking questions about this and wanting to see, what are your commitments? Are they public? Where do you have room to grow? What have you accomplished? This is important to everyone, and especially now people are going to be asking you questions about that, evaluating you as a potential partner in their career. So saying, I'm not sure, I'll get back to you, is not going to cut it. Saying, I think we put something out there, but I'm not quite sure what it is, isn't going to cut it. That people want to see action and change, and real change. So it looks like we're just about out of time. I'd love to kind of close out discussion with just a very quick round robin. What's the ultimate goal a company should strive for in committing to these efforts to root out inequities within their doors?
I'll start. I think the goal, I see a couple of goals that work together. One is the recognition that it's a journey, not a destination. There's no point where you're done. There's no point where you've met your quotas and we can move on. It's this is decades, if not centuries, of cultural examination to do. And the nature of progress is that there's always room to evolve, and we're going to learn things as we go deeper and get better. And then the other one I think is a point I've heard a couple of times today, which is it's not just about hiring. It's not just about HR. You bring a bunch of new voices into your company and you're still doing things the old way. You're going to have a lot of issues. And, I hear lots of stories of, people on the creative team, women, people of color, having to change the work that they do in order to appease, a white male creative director who is looking for this certain type of sense of humor, and that's all that they can present to that person. And the whole idea of bringing these voices in is to kind of expand that base and give a platform for all of it, and not allow things to kind of continue on the default path.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say having evidence of your DE&I strategy permeating throughout the organization, and having a culture where everyone can experience a true sense of belonging, one where they feel safe, bringing their unique perspectives and authentic selves to the table, so they're not wasting their precious energy hiding pieces of themselves so that they can be accepted by some norm.
Yeah, and I would add, my last thoughts here is listen to your people. Empathetic listening. There are a lot of types of listening, but empathetic listening is important. Pick a lane, stick to it, make changes. You have to be bold, you have to be honest, and you have to be inclusive.
Thanks very much, folks, for being here today and opening up and giving us a little bit of a peek under the hood to see the tactics you're using for ensuring DE&I is realized throughout your entire organization. For those of you watching today who are beginning this work, we really hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own organization's values and to start to collect that really important data on your own potential blind spots to start that journey. And for those of you who have already begun this work in earnest, we hope this conversation has also helped you to think about how to more closely integrate DE&I into your overall strategy and the work you produce for your clients. I think this conversation has led to the conclusion pretty strongly that both of these are essential for realizing our shared commitment to creating organizations in an industry where everyone can equally thrive. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, John.